So we've talked about different types of political boundaries. Now we're going to move on to the functions of these boundaries. And we know boundaries establish the limits of sovereignty. Boundaries are defined. They are legally or formally established through some type of agreement, whether it be a treaty or a negotiation between different entities like countries, states, or local governments. Boundaries are also delimited, meaning they're drawn on a map to show where they exist. Boundaries are also demarcated, which means they're physically marked with visible features like walls, fences, ports, or signs to establish where it is. For example, when you go into different states in the United States, you see those welcome to South Dakota, welcome to Maine, welcome to Florida signs. They can also be town signs. The Berlin Wall, which separated East and West Germany during the Cold War, is another example as well as the Korean demilitarized zone, which is a more modern example because that separates North and South Korea. Let's go through some divisions that political boundaries coincide with. They coincide with different cultural, national, and economic divisions. For example, in Belgium, there's Flanders, which is the Dutch-speaking region of the north, and Wallonia, which is the French-speaking region in the south here. So the boundaries between the north and south regions are separated based on cultural differences, specifically linguistic differences. Then there's East Timor and Indonesia. East Timor's population has a distinct national identity. They're influenced by Portuguese colonization, which brought about the Catholic faith to the region, while Indonesia is predominantly Muslim. So we can see here that there are both national and cultural differences here being divided by the boundaries, because we have two different countries here showing two different nations, as well as the religious differences showing cultural differences. North and South Mexico, within the country, the north is more economically developed with lower poverty levels, more urban areas, more industrialization and manufacturing, while the south is more agriculture based with more poverty, lower incomes, less infrastructure. You get the gist here. So we're seeing economic divisions between North and Southern Mexico. If we actually look at Mexico and the United States is of course way more developed than Mexico, so that national boundary shows economic divisions as well. So we're looking here that boundaries can occur at a national scale of analysis. We're looking at different countries, as well as subnational. We're looking at different regions within the countries as well. We can even go in further into different cities. If you go to New York City, different parts of New York City are more developed than others. There's Chinatown and other enclaves that have different cultural groups or nations residing there. Let's go over demilitarized zones real quick. So these are areas established by treaties or some kind of agreement where military activity is prohibited or heavily restricted. So anything like troop movement, artillery, and weapon testing is prohibited. These zones are created as more peaceful buffer zones to prevent conflict between neighboring states or regions. And the biggest example that you really need to know is in Korea. It was created after the Korean War, and it divides North and South Korea as a buffer zone. That's to prevent military conflict or confrontation between the two countries here. There's also a DMZ between Israel and Syria that was established after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, and it's been reinforced since then to prevent hostilities and maintain peace between the two states. Let's go over different disputes and interactions. So boundaries change over time, and they're often disputed as people or governments may claim different areas. And boundaries can also reinforce interaction. It can also discourage interaction and communication. So boundaries often define access to natural resources like water, minerals, and energy. Canada has access to the resources within the boundaries of Canada. It doesn't have leeway with all the resources in the United States or Iceland or Greenland, because that's not within the boundaries that defines Canada. There are shared rivers and lakes such as the Jordan River between Israel, Jordan, and Palestine that often lead to disputes over water rights. If you see that this river, if you look at the map, flows between a lot of different countries, and they may claim territoriality over the resources and over the river itself. But this is a shared river. There's a bunch of shared lakes and other water bodies as well between these countries. That leads to disputes over the boundaries and the resources. There are treaties that can help mitigate any type of conflict or tension by establishing rules for resource use. And we're going to look at the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which deals with water, maritime rights and usage, and we can abbreviate it to UNCLOS. Then there's free trade zones and other economic agreements that allow for shared prosperity and collaboration on regional products, as well as import and exporting goods without any tariffs or taxes, and that promotes economic exchange and communication. There's countries with strict border controls that may discourage interaction. That can affect labor movement and regional cooperation. For example, it's very, very hard to get into North Korea, almost impossible to get in or out of North Korea, and that's discouraged a lot of movement and cooperation. You don't see anyone moving to North Korea for jobs or education because they have such strict boundaries within that country, or I guess I'd say around the country. Now let's look at UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. We're looking at water. It's the constitution of the oceans as it regulates ocean space. So let's go over the different zones that are defined by UNCLOS. The first one is the territorial sea, and it extends from 12 nautical miles from the coastline. And in the territorial waters, countries have full sovereignty and commercial vessels may pass through as long as they don't threaten the peace, order, or security of the coastal state. So any law within the country applies to the territorial sea. And if you're a non-commercial vessel, you may be challenged upon your entry into the territorial waters. States can take any measures necessary into the territorial seas because they have this full sovereignty and they can enforce any law that they pass within the country. Then there's the contiguous zone, which overlaps up to 12 nautical miles, but it also extends to the 24 nautical mile point. They have limited sovereignty in the contiguous zone, but can enforce laws regarding customs, immigration, sanitation, and fishing. Non-commercial vessels can pass, but they also must follow these laws. The next is the exclusive economic zone, the EEZ, and that extends up to 200 nautical miles from the shoreline, and that's where sovereign rights over natural resources are present. So they have the right to fish, to collect oil, to extract gas or other minerals and resources from the waters. The state has the exclusive right to explore, exploit, conserve, and manage these resources. They can leave them alone, or they can exploit them and take as much fish as they like. Canada's exclusive economic zone is different from the United States' economic zone. Any vessel from the United States cannot fish and in the Canadian exclusive economic zone without permission. That would be considered theft. Now, the countries are still responsible for environmental protection in this zone. So any major environmental catastrophes like an oil spill, the country is still liable within the exclusive economic zone. Then after that is the high seas, and that's anything beyond the 200 nautical miles here. We can look on this map where exclusive economic zones end and where high seas are present. And these are areas of the ocean that are not within the jurisdiction or control of any country. They are beyond the exclusive economic zone. So what this means is that they're up for grabs. Anyone can fish there. Anyone can extract the resources. They can't enforce their laws in these high seas. Any rules are going to be defined by the United Nations that created this agreement here. But you can go out and fish in the high seas. You can go out and put your vessel, go on a cruise ship throughout the high seas without having to worry about being challenged because you're not within any territorial waters. We have this principle of freedom that allows activities like navigation, overflight, fishing, and the laying of submarine cables. These are allowed by any country as long as they're in the high seas. And no state has any sovereignty over the high seas. There are international waters. So this is a little graphic that shows the different zones on UNCLOS and where they start and where they end. And what you really need to focus on is the territorial sea, the contiguous zone, the EEZ, and the high seas. And we see that, of course, they all overlap up to 12 nautical miles. And then the contiguous zone and the EEZ overlap. And then up to 200 nautical miles is just the exclusive economic zone. And then beyond that is the high seas, which are the international waters here. Don't worry about the continental shelf or any of the plains. Don't worry about that physical geography. You only have to worry about the zones and what each zone is specific to. Now let's look at some different current events that relate to maritime territoriality and the seas and relate to UNCLOS. So the first one is the Arctic Circle territory. So the Arctic ice has been melting at high rates recently, opening up the region to increase shipping routes because the water is available, to put your boat or your vessel on. There's also room for resource exploration and, of course, territorial claims. Who owns this ocean that has so much resources in it? There are a lot of natural resources available like oil, gas, and minerals that have not been extracted yet because of the ice and the land masses there. And its strategic shipping routes are central to these disputes. They can easily get these resources and ship them out and bring them to these countries that surround the Arctic Circle. So there's a lot of claims over this territory and a lot of demand. Estimates suggest that the Arctic may hold 13% of the world's undiscovered oil reserves. That's probably worth billions of dollars, as well as a lot of natural gas. There's a lot of money to be made for these countries or just countries that want to extract from the Arctic Arctic Circle. According to UNCLOS, a country can claim an extended continental shelf beyond the typical 200 nautical miles of its EEZ if it can demonstrate that the seabed is a natural extension of its landmass. And what this essentially means in easy terms is that the countries can try to extend their exclusive economic zone if their country is extended. If the seabed, which is like the ocean floor, is part of that big landmass, then they can extend their exclusive economic zone. So some countries surrounding the Arctic Circle, maybe they have a lot of islands in the area, are trying to extend their exclusive economic zone to get as much as the Arctic Circle as they can to extract these very valuable resources. Countries like Russia, Canada, Denmark, through Greenland, are submitting evidence to try to extend their parts of the Arctic seabed, thus extend their exclusive economic zone and their resource extraction control. Next, we have the South China Sea. So this is a highly disputed area with numerous territorial claims by countries like China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and we can see here that China has a Next, we have the South China Sea, and this is a highly disputed area with lots of territorial claims by countries like China, the Philippines, and Malaysia, and Vietnam. China's 9-dash line claims a vast portion of the South China Sea, and it conflicts with the exclusive economic zones of other countries like the Philippines and Vietnam. So what essentially this means is that China has claimed parts of the South China Sea and says that's part of their exclusive economic zone, and parts of the zones overlap with the exclusive economic zones of other countries in the region, like the Philippines and Vietnam. In 2016, there was a tribunal ruled in favor of the Philippines, saying that China had no claim to any part of their exclusive economic zone. Now, despite the ruling, China continues to assert its control, and it actually built artificial islands in the Spratly region here, which is right off the coast of the Philippines and Vietnam, as you see here, very disputed waters. And what they're doing is they're building these islands to claim that there's more land mass that's part of their country, and they want 200 nautical miles more of their EEZ, or just more EEZ in general, for more control and more resources. And that's led to a lot of military tensions as well as regional concerns. Now, Article 60 of UNCLOS, you don't have to memorize that, specifies that artificial islands cannot be used to claim an EEZ. So what they're saying is China really can't do this at all. It violates UNCLOS. These islands serve as military bases for China, and particularly Chinese Navy, and they're equipped with missile systems, radars, runways, fuel storage facilities, and naval facilities. And that can bring about a lot of tension, and actually people might be a little scared of China if they have all this military presence very close to their countries. And they may be afraid if they mess with China or try to interact with China, they may be threatened or worse, harmed. The South China Sea is a major international shipping route, so there's a lot of economic exchange going on here. And if they're building these islands, they're creating a choke point within the area here. And by militarizing these islands, China asserts not only its territorial claims, but a big influence over global shipping routes, as it is a choke point. And they may have influence over what cargo or what ships can go through this area of the South China Sea, and that can influence global economies. Next, we have the Aegean Sea. There's been tensions over Turkey's exploration of gas reserves. It always has to deal with natural resources. And we're looking at disputed waters near the country of Cyprus. And what Turkey has done here is refused to recognize Cyprus has a exclusive economic zone. And they've carried out drilling activities in waters that are claimed by the country of Cyprus. And that's led to disputes and a lot of tensions within countries around the Aegean Sea, like Greece, as well as the European Union. Both Turkey and Greece have increased their military presence in the region, which has raised concerns, of course, about potential military clashes and violence. Finally, we're going to talk about this concept called the median line principle, and this is to establish maritime boundaries for countries that have exclusive economic zones that overlap. So both countries don't get 200 nautical miles of EEZ. Let's say two countries are only apart by 300 nautical miles. Each one's going to get 150. It's going to cut their EEZs in half. And this is to ensure fair and equitable division of overlapping maritime zones when these countries are close together. And when they do this, they cut the EEZs in half, and the contiguous zone is usually removed. removed. In freshwater contexts, such as with Lake Erie, the United States and Canada have used the median line principle to divide water rights. And then countries around the Baltic Sea, such as Sweden, Finland, and Estonia, have used the median line principle to define their maritime boundaries and the overlapping areas of the relatively narrow sea. So you see these narrow bodies of water between countries, and you don't get 400 nautical miles between the countries. So they just cut the EEZs in half so they're equitable for each country surrounding that sea or lake or other body of water here. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really does help me out, and it costs $0. I have some free resources for you in the description down below if you'd like to use them. If you have any AP Human Geography related questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to leave a comment down below the video or send me a message on Discord. I'll see you guys in the next video, though. Adios.